Hey, welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to this channel, we talk about mental health through pop culture. My name is Josh, and I am joined by Todd Carey. He is the writer, director, and documentarian behind the film Touch Kink, which made its debut this year at Fantasia Fest. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course, I'm fascinated by this documentary. Can you kinda tell, us a little bit about, what Touch Kink is all about?
Well, it started with a sort of a fortuitous meeting with a dominatrix a number of years ago, and she talked about how she was frustrated by how people judged people when they heard one thing. It was like almost like she could cure cancer at this point, but all they're going to remember is she's a dominatrix, and the myths and misconceptions around it. So the film started off becoming about the myths and misconceptions, the people, the reality versus what reality of what it is versus what people thought it was or what it implied. And then it progressed to me meeting just amazing people that really shared what are very intimate moments of their life or very intimate knowledge of themselves, and it became sort of bigger as it progressed. And in the end, I wanted just to leave people with a better understanding of the multidimensional aspects of kink and let them meet a few of these people and essentially judge for themselves what it was about.
One of the things that, just for viewers, if you guys are not aware with, like, some of the terminologies, dom is referred to as the individual that is considered dominant within the type of play that the individuals would be doing, whether it's a couple or group, and then you have the subs that would be referred to as essentially the counterpart, if you will, to the dom. And so my question moving off of that is how what was kind of like the interview process for uh kind of gathering the subjects for this process, because this documentary interviews literally people from all over the world, and kind of it's really interesting how you kind of get to see how both American but also how United Kingdom and kind of really how Canada and like how different parts of the world embrace these cultures. So what was kind of the process like for finding the correct subjects to bring this vision to life?
Well, the process was very organic. As this is a very guarded community, and there has been sort of documentaries and things in the past that really did make them two-dimensional, scary characters without any depth. People were very, very guarded. So January, who was my first point of contact, basically vouched for me and said, "Look, I trust this guy's intentions, and once you're sort of trusted, the doors open up." If they believe your intentions. And from that point, it became actually fairly easy for me to uh, get a whole bunch of interviews. And I started at a convention of dominatrixes where I think the first 5 days of it, I had 60 interviews in the can. And then they understood by my questions and by talking to me that my intentions were honest. And they, gave me even more references and more access. So once you were sort of trusted, the doors open. If you're not trusted, the doors remain closed.
I'm kind of curious, as someone like yourself, like would you say that you had already like a invested interest into the world of kink, or kind of like what's your relationship with to this community?
Well, I discovered relatively early that I was more of a classically dominant person. And that was kind of revealing. I didn't really think about it, I could say, in so much in a kink context. I just sort of discovered that I was the kind of person that just kind of did what he wanted to do and figured it out, as opposed to someone who was sort of wanting to follow along and do as you're told, sort of thing. So I had a basic understanding of what kink was. Um, more from a male dominant, female submissive point of view. Um, but as I started meeting dominatrixes and queer people and non-gay people and everything else, I was looking for something more of a common overall thread, because it looks different depending on who's playing and what they're playing. And it's really hard to explain to people. So I was trying to, for my own curiosity, and think the audience's curiosity, I wanted to know more. Like, was it about sex? Is it always about sex? Is it a, is this a 24/7 thing? What are the degrees of it? Why do people do this? That was sort of curious. So long story short, I have always had an interest and an understanding of my relationship, or my interests, but I didn't really understand the everything else, which is so much more.
You talked earlier about the starting process of this documentary being wanting to deconstruct the myths and misconceptions surrounding the world of kink. What was you one of the biggest misconceptions about this community that you really wanted to tackle in this documentary?
Well, it's the same thing that they said about homosexuals and other people that they don't agree with in the past. Is there something deviant or something mentally unhealthy about these people? There's something just wrong. And they would use tools of the institution like the American Psychiatric Association's manual, which up until 50 years ago classified same-sex relationship as a mental deviance. We as kinky people basically had the same thing up until literally 10 years ago, when they basically said, okay, maybe it's not about kink. So we're kind of following that lead a little bit. But the biggest one, I think, was that is people just make an assumption that these people are somehow damaged or somehow mentally unfit or somehow less than, which is a tool, of course, society has used from time immemorial to marginalize and control, you know?
So as a storyteller, you're really wanting to humanize the people within the kink community and really within the subjects of I mean, towards the end, I don't want to give it away, but there's some of the journeys that we follow on, they have really heartbreaking journeys because of these societal expectations or ideologies. And I think this film does a really great job at capturing the humanity behind a lot of these somewhat larger than life personalities. And I really liked how this movie also kind of had like a timeline for how we as a society have seen uh kink looked at, as you had said, like kind of almost like a disease. What was the kind of research process for finding that, creating that timeline we see in the movie?
Again, it was very organic. I started and I just kept interviewing people, and then I would sort of check in with them and see what's going on. And the vast majority of people, their life, nothing particularly unusual happened, where several things started to happen, issues in their lives or issues with the media or various issues. So I followed up with those people and then follow up again with those people. So to try to create those lines. So it was very, very organic. Over the course of a year, the main stories, the main things that happened were what I featured in the documentary. And I don't think there was ever an agenda other than just to humanize and to show and to essentially report on what happened. And for some people, things worked out great. For other people, not so great. And I think that adds to the honesty of it. And it's not about being kinky. It's just about things happen in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So correct me if I'm wrong, but this is your first film,
Yes.
correct? And I'm kind of curious, I feel like the stories could have been told through a series of short films. They could have been told in the medium of like a book or like a overarching like series of articles or a drama set tape drama or any other type of feature film. What made you want to pursue the documentary route with telling these stories?
It seemed like the most authentic way of doing it. Ever since I was 13, I worked as a newspaper photographer, and not as a director or producer, but I've been in and around film and TV my whole life. And it just seemed like a natural thing for me to do, is to document the film, document the people, and see what happened, and try and put together a timeline based on the reality of my experiences over the year and a half.
And with this, what were some of the learning curves that you learned as a first-time director?
Boy,
Whether it it be like, the ways to like interview people for future subjects for other documentaries or other stories. I'm genuinely curious.
I can honestly say I would never do it the same way again. I had almost 500 hours of material. I started with around 120 subjects, then followed up with about 60 subjects, then followed up again with about 30 subjects, and then followed up again with five. So 500 hours of material, because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know who was going, who'd add something, who'd have some sort of line. I didn't want just to be talking heads. I wanted you to sort of see something that happened to them along their life. It wasn't just sort of academics. Here's someone going through some trial or tribulation around their interest in kink, or their desire to be who they are. And I honestly would never do that again. I mean, certainly not without a larger team or something, just because it was just too much material. It took me literally a couple of years to process and edit that and distill that all down. And I think if I had to do it again, I might do it about something that happened already. So I could tell, so I know the beginning, middle, and end, as opposed to being naively, okay, we'll see, because, luckily most people just sort of had a nice year and nothing particularly interesting happened. But that's not very interesting for a documentary. So I had to focus on a lot of people. So yeah, I would never do it that way again. Maybe pick one subject, maybe, sometimes reality TV, that, they put people into sort of an unusual situation. And then, the drama is sort of manufactured, as opposed to sort of honestly and organically being told. So maybe a little bit of that to try and get the story a little quicker, but just not to film as much. It was too expensive, took too much time, too much money, and yeah.
It sounds like such a daunting task, to go from that many individuals to the very few we see in the film. I think this, I think you captured that desire really well in blending these character journeys, but also having interviews with individuals that have, I would consider, probably like experts in this field, or they've been in it for, over 20 years. And one of them, as a gentleman, who talks about like the rise of kink in, the last 30 years, where when he started in the community, it was like 60 people getting together. And now you have like conventions that we see in this movie. What is it, do you think, that is like would cause something like this invested interest into such a world as kink?
Well, I think, I guess it's like anything. I mean, you buy your first pair of skis, and if you try and do the triple diamond run, you're probably going to die. Um, just that sometimes a little knowledge is dangerous. And a lot of people know a little bit of something, and then frankly, even people within the community all have very different takes, and there's this sort of feeling of one true way. And you hang out with female dominatrixes, and their worldview is about femdom. You hang out with fetishists, their worldview is about latex and fetishes. If you hang out with, so it's like there's sort of a lot of groups within a larger group, and once people feel comfortable in group, they often stop learning. And I'm guilty of that too. I mean, I met communities that I had, I considered myself pretty open-minded, and I met communities that kind of surprised me in good ways, and really sort of made me think differently than I had thought in the past too. So the dangerous part is people read a book or learn the basics, which may work in a given situation, but then they're not really understanding the whole thing. And I'm trying to get them to at least understand, the key notion of, is it really what we're talking about? Because what we're talking about is negotiation, enthusiastic consent, compassionate play, and caring about the person. I mean, in some way, making sure they're okay. That's what we're talking about when we talk about, modern kink practices.
I love that this film dives so heavily into the importance of consent because I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions when you're talking specifically about the world of kink that um I'm really grateful that that's such a big portion of this documentary and that that's one of the myths, so to say, that you guys decided to um tackle. Why did you guys feel like it was important to really emphasize something as simple as consent that we just kind of seem to throw out the window when it comes to sex sometimes?
Yeah, and that's the wrong. I think there's a lot of confusion in interactions between people these days. And they need to really, it's not so much what you do in my mind. It's not whether you do X or Y or Z. It's whether everybody's down with that. Everybody's cool with that. And I think there's a lot of confusion in our generation right now. We're like, oh, can you ever slap somebody on the butt anymore? Like, the answer is, if you have consent and the person wants you to slap them on the bus, then hell yes. But you don't just assume anything anymore. And there's sort of it answers that question. I remember my father literally going, I don't know what you're supposed to do anymore because the rules are all gone. And I wanted to answer the question is that you can do anything you want to do as long as that person's down with it and that you've got consent and knowledge of what you're doing. And there's no universal set of rules for everybody anymore, but you still can do all sorts of crazy fun stuff. You just have to have that little extra step. And not only is that not a bad thing, it's an incredibly rewarding thing because so many people are so focused. Okay, you meet someone that you fancy and you're so focused on X. And then maybe that person doesn't want to give you X, and you walk away and you're like, oh, well, I didn't get X. Or maybe if you really cared about the person, you'd say, well, what do you like? Oh, A, B, what's C? Oh, D, never heard of that. Oh, that doesn't sound too bad. Maybe we'll try D. So they try out these other activities, and you know what? They might end up getting X at some point anyway. But if you care about someone and you're connected to them in some sort of way, it doesn't always have to be about X. It can always be about all these other things, and there may be a hell of a lot of wonderful things that you discover along the way too. Maybe you actually end up liking A, B, C, D, E, F. So I love that idea of just with consent and informed, enthusiastic consent. There's so many amazing roads you can go down that someone else might go, oh my God, that's crazy. But who cares? That's not their problem. It's your problem, or your
I,
issue.
I don't really feel like this is a spoiler, but this movie's outlined kind of in like the four pillars of King. And you kind of like it's negotiation, it's the actual consent as we've mentioned, it's the actual like play of whatever it has been illustrated within that negotiation period, then it's aftercare. Which are, four really strong things I think to kind of break down a lot of these misconceptions that have kind of been accumulated by the subject of kink or like the controversy of kink over, the last 20, 30 years. When you were kind of like shaping out the narrative of this movie, when did the idea kind of start to like form of these four pillars when it came specifically
Well, that
to
that was
bringing
that
it
was
in?
pretty much right from the beginning. I wanted to structure the film as a kinky person would structure a scene,
Mm.
which means, okay, let's talk to the audience a little bit. Let's give them some behind the scenes. We focus on someone who's actually filming something that's not real, just to give you a little sort of information. And then we sort of focus heavily on consent, and we don't really. It's sort of the latter part of the film. We get into the heavier play stuff. the scenes that might be a little edgy for some and others. It was always that plan. And in the end, it really is, okay, here's aftercare. Here's how it worked out for these folks. And here's what we learned. And here's what we hope you learn. So that was that was always the plan from the very beginning, to sort of structure it that way.
So this movie made its debut at Fantasia Fest. Where can people find you online? Where can people find out more information about the movie? And what festivals do you guys currently have coming up?
We just started the festival run. I had a few smaller festivals before Fantasia that I withdrew from because I wanted to show at Fantasia, and now we're waiting to hear back on other festivals. The URL is Touch, Kink, CKINK, .com, and you can sort of follow along the bouncing ball there, I suppose.
All right. Well, make sure that you guys follow it and check out our other interviews and reviews from this year's Fantasia Fest. Make sure that you guys hit that subscribe button below and make sure that you guys check out Touch Kink if it comes near your area. If you guys have ever been curious about the world of dominatrixes or this kink as a whole, this is a great entry point for you. Todd, thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
So, yep. Have a good night, guys, and stay classy.